Hello. Okay, this is going to be a longer video, but I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible. And we're going to be talking about clean versus unclean food. And does it matter? Okay, so most generally the interpretation of scripture goes something like this. In Genesis, it's all clean. In Noah, nope, there's clean and unclean. Then Jesus, before he dies, there's still clean and unclean. After he died and arose, now it's all clean again. But in the millennium, it's back to being clean and unclean. Does this make sense? No. Can we interpret scripture like this? I mean, one minute things are clean, pig is unclean, pig is clean, pig is unclean. It's this back and forth. I think we need to look at scripture as a whole, and that's what we're going to do. And so starting Genesis 9, verse 3, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. Notice he references the green herbs. Now, immediately we all think, okay, everything that moves, that's what it says. Everything's clean, right? Okay, let's keep going. Genesis 1:29, referencing the green herbs. God said, see, I've given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be food. Now, notice that he references the green herbs, and when we go and look at the scripture regarding green herbs, it says the ones that yield seed. It gives specific instructions. So looking at scripture as a whole, here's my question. If God did not give specific instructions regarding meat, whether, what's clean and unclean, then how did Noah know in Genesis 7:2 to take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate? How did he know what was clean and unclean if he didn't have any instructions regarding that? But yet we see in scripture that he knew. He knew what was clean, he knew what was unclean. And also, if he only took 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal and he ate it as food, then that animal would be extinct. We would no longer have pig because Noah would have ate it. But yet, because there was only 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal. But yet he said, take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal. Why? Was it just for sacrifice, or was it also for food for Noah and his family? And that's Genesis 7, verse 2. How did Noah know the difference? Moving on, God gives his law to Moses in Leviticus 11. Go read it. There's too much to cover on this video, so you can pause the video and go read Leviticus 11, where God gives his law regarding food. You can eat the split hoof and whatever it has a split hoof and choose the cud, but you can't eat things like a camel, a rabbit, a pig, because they don't have a split hoof and they don't chew cud. It has to be both. They're unclean to you. Fish must have scales and fins. Nothing else in the water is to be eaten. You can only eat what has scales and fins. It's interesting scientifically. Tests have been done regarding this with Johns Hopkins University back in 1953, and they tested it, and the toxicity levels concerning biblical food, what they called food and not food, the toxins in the stuff that doesn't, like the fish that doesn't have both scales and fins, or the animals that don't have the split hoof and chews the cud, the toxins levels are off the chart, which is what leads to disease in our body. So there's a reason behind this. And it goes on with birds. Don't eat vultures. Who wants to shoot a vulture and go eat it? Not me. And also notice that every classification, the ones that were not to eat, they're garbage collectors. They are created to clean the earth. That's their job. Anyway, so go read Leviticus 11, and then notice verse 44. Says, I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. Consecrate yourselves, be holy, for I am holy. Where else have we heard that? 1 Peter 1:16, be holy, for I am holy. Did you know that Peter was quoting the food laws? I didn't know that. I do now. It makes sense. He was Jewish. And you think he didn't know what he was quoting? I mean, back then they memorized. I mean, even I'm sure they still do today. They memorized the entire Old Testament. The first 5 books, they had it memorized. So do you think when he said, "Be holy for I am holy," you think Peter didn't know what he was quoting? Not likely. Okay. Pause this and go read Mark 7. Seriously. Pause the video and go read Mark 7. Okay. Notice the beginning. We are dealing with added laws or traditions of the elders. They're talking about hand washing. Okay, verse 5, the Pharisees asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to what?" Not according to God's law, according to the traditions of the elders. These are added laws that a lot of Jewish, different sects of Judaism had added laws to God's law, making it either heavier or even nullifying it. And Jesus came against this. He came against the added laws. He was restoring it to his Father's law alone, and taking the burden off people. Okay, so they had laws on top of God's law, and he's saying to them in Mark 7, I don't care if you put, if you have dirty hands or if you plop mud on it, I don't care. My Father calls it clean, it's clean. Whether you have dirty hands and touch it, although that's a good principle to wash your hands, but whether you touch it with dirty hands or not, doesn't matter. My Father said it's clean, it's clean. So that's what he's saying in Mark 7. Go study it for yourself. Okay, verse 19. Mark 7, verse 19. Some versions in Scripture, they add a comment in parentheses saying that Jesus declared all foods clean. This is man's interpretation. This is not in the Hebrew or the Greek. So this is somebody putting their own interpretation in it. So let me ask you, in Mark 7, who is Jesus speaking to? He's speaking to the Pharisees. They're Jewish people. What are the Pharisees the whole time looking to do? They're looking for a reason to crucify Jesus. So if Jesus, speaking to a Jewish crowd, was actually declaring in Mark 7 all food, or pig, because it's not technically food, but if he was saying, I declare everything clean, now God's law doesn't matter, Leviticus 11 doesn't matter, I declare it all clean, they would have ripped their robes, drug him in front of the court council, and had him crucified right that minute. I mean, they were looking for a reason to crucify him. Think about the logic in what you're saying whenever you read Mark 7 and say, oh, he's declaring all food clean. He's talking to Jewish people. These Jewish people were looking for a reason to crucify him. If he was saying, no, we're doing away with my Father's law, in Leviticus 11, we're changing it, and now everything's clean, they would have took him or tried to take him. I mean, we would have seen in Scripture where they ripped their robes and tried to come after him to crucify him right then and there. I suggest that's not what he's saying. He's not changing his Father's law, but he is coming against the traditions of the elders where they were saying, you touch it with dirty hands, it's now unclean. He was saying, no, my Father says it's clean, it's clean. All right, pause this and go read Acts chapter 10. Seriously. Okay, Peter's vision. Now think back a decade earlier. Okay, this is a decade later after Mark 7. We come to Peter's vision in Acts chapter 10. If Jesus back in Mark 7 declared that all meat was clean, then why a decade later does Peter, when he has this vision from God, he says, no, my Lord, I'm not eating that. I haven't eaten or even touched anything unclean. I mean, did Peter not get the memo that Jesus declared everything clean, all meat clean? I mean, a decade earlier. So if that's the case, I mean, why is Peter still calling it unclean? I mean, because that's not correct interpretation. He's not. He's saying no, So 3 times Peter has this vision because he didn't understand what was going on. And in verse 17, while Peter is wondering about the vision, the men show up from Cornelius, okay? Verse 19, the Spirit tells Peter to go with the men. Why does the Spirit have to tell Peter to go with the men in verse 19? Okay, a little bit of background. Peter is Jewish. They had an oral law. The oral law said you're not supposed to associate with Gentiles. And actually, you'll notice this in verse 28, where Peter says he's referencing the oral law, that we're not supposed to associate with the Gentiles, but God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. Right then and there, right there in Scripture, right there in front of you, verse 28, I should not call anyone impure or unclean. The vision, he completely